He's one of the best at what he does. The director and filmmaker and documentarian is back with a 4-part series. Muhammad Ali starts Sunday, September 19th at 8 p.m. on PBS. Ken Burns here on The Rich Eisen Show. How are you, sir?
I am doing very well. How are you doing?
I am doing well. What attracted you to the subject matter, Ken?
Well, this is co-directed with my oldest daughter, Sarah Burns, and her husband, David McMahon. We
Terrific.
did the Central Park 5 film and Jackie Robinson together. So in some ways, this is a kind of obvious choice. But a dear friend of ours, a biographer of Ali, most recent biographer, Jonathan Eig, just said as we were working on Jackie 7 or 8 years ago, this is a great story. And we, of course, went, oh, my God, how did we ever spend 40 years doing this and not have thought about it before? So we've just dove in wholeheartedly. And I think, I grew up with him. I remember my dad telling me that he won gold in the 60 Olympics when I was 7 years old. The story is just beyond anything of our wildest understanding. And look, I should just say, there are a lot of documentaries on Muhammad Ali, and there are lots of good ones, really, really good films, and we're not attempting to replace them or change them. We just noticed that they were about a specific fight or a series of fights or about a couple-year period. We really wanted to do soup to nuts from, birth and boyhood in Jim Crow segregated Louisville, Kentucky, to death by Parkinson's not 5 years ago in 2016.
So how does one approach an iconic figure that has been talked about and documented, his story in so many different ways, as you just pointed out? How do you attack such an endeavor, Ken Burns?
I remember Shelby Foote said to me when I was working on the Civil War, he said, God is the greatest dramatist, which is a way of saying, and then, and then, and then. So we just literally start at the beginning. Obviously, we're going to do deep research. We're going to read. We're going to try to find, and we did find in database 15,000 photographs, 400 or 500 hours of footage of him, and particularly interviews of him, that some of which have never been seen the light of day since they were originally taken. Home movies and stuff that definitely is from folks' garages that has never been seen before. The families called me up and said, wow, I never saw that picture of him holding me and saying, don't you know your daddy's the baddest in the world? So we feel like we did a good deep dive, and then it's just working with scholars and people to make sure that we can not just animate the boxing story, which is like the collected works of William Shakespeare, but also this journey in faith, just becoming a member of the Nation of Islam. It's not enough just to mention it or describe what it was. It's an ongoing fluid process of a young man finding something that gave some meaning to his life at that point and then maturing with it over the course of his life, where he sort of sheds it in order to embrace the more orthodox, the more, mainstream Islam, which the sect, the Nation of Islam, was. And it's also about the personal life. 4 wives, that means 3 divorces, lots of kids, that means children of divorces, money, all of that sort of stuff. It was an attempt to have a comprehensive, integrated view of the whole of Muhammad Ali. And if you think about it, he touches every single issue of the last half of the 20th century, the role of sports in the United States, the role of a black athlete, the definitions of black masculinity, about the dimensions of the civil rights movement, about faith, about religion, about Islam, about politics, about war. I mean, all of that he touches, and all of those themes are still relevant. So in the end of the day, you have a film, I think, that is about freedom. It's very difficult for a black man in this continent to escape the specific gravity of that circumstance. It's about courage, a young man in his 20s who says he's willing to stand up to machine gun fire rather than go against his faith. We took it as a political statement, but it was a faith statement to not fight in Vietnam. And then, of course, a very difficult topic, one that the FCC, a 4-letter word that the FCC allows you and me to use, but we don't have a very good track record of actually talking about it in depth, which is, this is a story about love. He dies the most beloved person on the planet after being in the 1960s and early 70s seemingly one of the most divisive people, because I say seemingly only because I think it's a lot of what was projected into him rather than what he himself did.
Ken Burns here on the Rich Eisen Show. Muhammad Ali is coming your way to your PBS station starting September 19th, this Sunday at 8 Eastern, a 4-part series. What did you learn about him? Ken?
Everything. I mean, I thought I knew him. My whole life accompanied his, and I watched him. I met him. I just think there's all of these dimensions. There's great humor. There's great pathos. There's great, tension. You could take the first Liston fight, and you could almost, no Hollywood producer would, buy it. Or the Thrilla in Manila, in which he said he was closest to death, or when he wins the championship from Foreman, when most people in his corner are worried that he's going to be killed, he actually destroys Foreman. There's all of that, and then there's the intimate moments where we sort of say, well, in that early period, all he did was brag and make jokes and recite poetry, and I'm so bad I can drown a drink of water and kill a dead tree. When in fact there's several things that we discovered that were so thoughtful and wise that belied his age, belied the job that he was doing, the career that he'd chosen, and we're speaking to sort of big, heavy things, and I'm just stunned at the intimacy of who this guy. He knew early on. He put on boxing gloves, and within a few months he's saying, I'm going to be the greatest, and everybody's going like, yeah,
right.
You don't have anything. And he was the greatest. Or he'd say stuff like, well, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad doesn't want me to box, so I don't need to box. And the guy says, you give up boxing? He goes, yeah, I don't need to box, but I know I'm here for a purpose. And you could see that early on as a young kid. He knew he was put on this earth for something else.
The thing that, really struck me when he passed away, Ken Burns, was the number of people, and I'm not just talking about famous people, peers, or people who covered him, the number of just regular citizens around the globe that posted photographs that they had with him, that he stopped and took photographs and talked to people, and everyone had a story. Honestly,
yeah.
Like it was wild to me how much he got around. It's crazy, Ken.
He
the people's
always
champ.
wanted to give that. I mean, when he says, I'm pretty as a girl, I'm beautiful, I'm black, I'm beautiful, we think it was a part of an unexpected braggadocio that up until that point, athletes weren't supposed to behave, and certainly black athletes weren't supposed to behave that way. But what he was doing was he was giving permission to people, black people around the United States, but oppressed people everywhere, the permission to feel good about themselves. And so he is on so many continents, Africa, North Africa, Middle East, Asia, South America, as well as here at home, a beloved figure, and Europe as well, a beloved figure. And as David Remnick, the editor of The New Yorker and a biographer of early Clay's life, Eaton just said that, by the time he dies, he's revered almost like a religious figure, like the Buddha. Everybody has that story because he took the time. It wasn't like, okay, we're done with the autograph session. How much did I make? Let's go. It was no pay, just here I am. I will give you until you're satisfied. I met him once. It was the same way. It's just the generosity of spirit. It didn't matter. It was just so pure, and I'm still impressed with what he is. And having said that, Rich, this film doesn't pull any punches about his failings. They're all over and in every single episode, and he becomes aware of them and tries his best at the end of his life to atone. He feels there's a tallying angel, and that the way he's treated women, his unfaithfulness to his wives, the way he cut off Malcolm X so abruptly when ordered to by Elijah Muhammad just before Malcolm X was murdered by the Nation of Islam, and also the way he had treated Joe Frazier by using, as the scholar Todd Boyd said, the language of a white racist about his opponent. He said, this is the ultimate conscious black guy using the language of a white racist. He says something that was a key for me in understanding Ali. He says, I just think in this instance he used his powers for evil instead of good. And I go, oh, that's right. We're making a film about a superhero. That's what this is. This is a superhero in every sense of the word. The Marvel stuff is just, DOA as far as I'm concerned. This is somebody who lived a larger-than-life life that we can all participate in and take what we can from. It's not that, the world had opinions of him. The world changed its opinions of him as he grew, and more importantly, we grew. And I think one of the great gifts of Muhammad Ali is he asked us to be different than we were.
The filmmaker, director, and writer of co-writer and co-director of Muhammad Ali, which is going to be on PBS, 4-part series, Sunday, September 19th at 8 Eastern time. Ken Burns here on the Rich Eisen Show, and the few minutes I have left with you, I would be remiss if I did not speak to one of the greatest chroniclers and documenters of baseball from that spectacular baseball film that you put together back in the 90s, all the way through. So what do you make of Ohtani? Somebody who's I'd love to get your perspective on what Shohei Ohtani's putting out on the field right now.
It's just so exciting because you've got, the shades of Babe Ruth. And you've got a kind of revitalized sense of, the game, everybody's always willing to write baseball's obituary. I had a quote in the film in the first episode of the baseball series in which in 1858 they were writing the obituary of baseball. Some guy named Pete O'Brien was saying, they don't play baseball the way they used to when I was a kid. I don't mean the rules are different, but the spirit's gone or this is gone, and we've been writing that obituary for so long, and it's always this ever-changing sense of surprise. And Shohei Ohtani just gives you this opportunity to go, this is why this is the best game ever invented. It's not just that the defense has the ball. It's not just that there's no clock. It's not just that the human being scores, but that we have so many different personalities and so many different skill sets. As the greatest basketball player, or one of the greatest basketball players of all time, discovered when he tried momentarily to switch and could not hit a $185 in the national pastime, this is a really tough thing to do, to take a bit of turned northern ash or now maple and hit a horsehide or whatever it is now coming at you at 100 miles an hour and deciding in a millisecond to hit it. And that the people who fail 7 times out of 10 are going to the Hall of Fame if they do that for 15 years.
It is great. Seinfeld once told me the greatest thing he thinks about baseball is that it's the only sport where it's the equality, the democracy of talent and physique, that essentially somebody the size of Aaron Judge and the size of Jose Altuve are both MVP candidates in this sport.
And that's not true of football or hockey or basketball, right? You do have your Spud Webb every once in a while, but look at Maddox. Greg Maddox looked like an accountant, Dan Okrent said in our film. It's just like he should be coming off the mound with a briefcase, right? And he's one of the greatest pitchers of the last, couple of generations.
Now, I know you have to go, but I do want to shoehorn one last in here for your Muhammad Ali film. Give me the good stuff on Cosell. You got some good stuff on Cosell?
Yeah, I think Cosell got, as David Remnick says in the film, he got Cassius Clay. He too long. He bugged him by not changing the name. But at the beginning, he's pretty critical of him for the braggadocio. But he comes around and understands him as a kind of avatar of a new athlete, not just a black athlete, but a new athlete. And I think they both, particularly Ali, who's a master showman and promoter, understood they could ride each other's coattails, even with the antagonism. At the heart of it, I think, is a deep love. And Cosell really understood the change agent that Ali was, and he came around to him, and he helped a lot of us. I remember watching stuff with my dad, and Howard Cosell was the first person that gave me permission to love Muhammad Ali at a time when people were still just so opposed to him for the change of the name, for the bragging, for the changing to Muslim and all that sort of stuff. And then the anti-war stuff, I agreed with that. But Cosell's an important part of this story and an important dimension. A guy from Brooklyn who kind of realizes that he can go far on this guy and this guy can go far on him, and that what they're celebrating is the essential humanity of both people. I
love it. And I'm sure you've heard the Billy Crystal story of what Muhammad Ali leaned over and said to him and asked him during Cosell's funeral, right? You heard that story, Ken?
No, tell me, please.
He said, Billy Crystal says he's sitting next to Muhammad Ali at the funeral, and the casket's right there in front of him, and Ali leans over and says, "Do you think he's got his toupee on in there?" That's what he said. That's what he said. That's what Crystal
That's
said.
perfect.
I mean, that's just unbelievable. Well, I'm honored that I could give you a little tidbit after your documentary is in the can and getting ready to be.
I always learn stuff after the fact.
Yeah, that's
Rich,
all right.
And you go, oh man, I wish I could put that in. Somebody told me that the Parkinson's had taken over and that Ali was not pathetic, but just he was so sad that he couldn't get up at all the different things at Frazier's funeral, and everybody was jumping up and jumping. Finally, at the end, he gets up, but he can't stop clapping. And Lonnie has to sort of stop the arms from clapping. And it just, they just broke my heart. Just broke my heart.
I cannot.
The fact that Frazier never forgave him, even though Ali apologized to him.
I cannot wait to see it. Ken Burns, thank you for coming on. Again, starting Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern on PBS, the four-part series, Muhammad Ali. Let's do this more often. I really enjoyed this chat.
I'm there anytime.
Thank you. That's Ken Burns right here on The Rich Eisen Show. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.